It's such a pleasure to have you with us at the launch of the Network Capital Summer School. Before we get started, I would love to introduce you to our broader team and some of our friends and partners who've joined this particular discussion with all of you. At any point, if you wish to ask questions, please raise your hands digitally. I believe Zoom allows you to do that, and we're going to pull you in. So first up, I'd like to introduce Varya. So Varya is the VP of Products and Government Affairs at Network Capital. She's just out of college and studied liberal arts and politics, but now does deep tech and operations work for Network Capital. So she is a living, breathing example of how what you study doesn't need to define what you do. She brings her liberal arts education to her work, which is largely tech and operations, and does a really good job at that. And she is among, in terms of age, closest to perhaps the many students who will join. So that is she. I'm Utkarsh. I'm the CEO of Network Capital. And I set up Network Capital largely as a passion project. At that time, I was working at Microsoft. And for those of you who've read my Harvard Business Review article, I explained what was the thought process behind leaving Microsoft, a job that I loved and did quite well at, into pursuing my passion. And what were the steps and how did the pandemic contribute to it? So if you haven't read it, I encourage you to take a look. But broadly, I set it up to democratize career intelligence. We live at a time where career advice or life advice is being thrown around left, right, and center, which leaves students, parents utterly confused about how to think things through. To address that, Network Capital initially started off as a Facebook group and then evolved into becoming one of the largest career intelligence communities. So for those of you who are existing subscribers, you can check out networkcapital.tv, and we focus on three elements: content, community, and career intelligence. Content, we bring the world's best experts, practitioners doing interesting things into teaching them to our subscribers. The second is community. I think in today's world, the ability to reinvent oneself is the most important skill, and you can't reinvent yourself alone. So you need the help of a community, and we've nurtured this for some time. And the last is career intelligence, which means that what does mentorship in the digital age really look like? I don't think it's just about connecting the right people. You need to create the right context, the right circumstances, the right preparation before and after to make the most of it. So we focus on these three C's. And I quite love my job. I enjoy what I do. And I'm excited to tell you more about it. Some of our partners on this particular discussion today include Karthik Desai, who's a longtime friend and a partner in various initiatives. He studied at Columbia and Wharton and now works at a leading impact investing fund, in addition to being the founder of the THC. He's going to tell you a bit about it, since mental health is one important component of today. He's also being joined by his extended team. They have backgrounds in anthropology and operations, and you're going to hear from them. So let's dive in. What is the Network Capital Summer School? Why are we doing it? And what is our objective? So at a very broad level, I think that education, not only in countries like India, but around the world, especially school education, is completely broken. So the way, if you look at the history of schools, schools came up exactly like factories came up. Schools have a bell, schools have desks, schools have students sitting exactly as workers used to sit in factories. So you replace a factory with a slightly prettier room if you come from a middle class or above background. The difference between a school and a factory is indistinguishable. And I think this factory-oriented learning model has left Jack a dull boy and Jill thoroughly dissatisfied with what she's learning. After studying at the best of institutions around the world, my team and I have come to the conclusion that if you want to make a mark in the education space, you have to reimagine education from the ground up. And when you reimagine ground up, you want to start with first principles thinking. Those of you who saw my TED talk knew that if you ask today a child in most countries to draw anything, just give him or her a creative experiment, and they'll perhaps end up drawing sun on a mountain with a river flowing with green grass and a boat somewhere. So we live in an era where we've managed to standardize creativity, and the Network Capital School is essentially designed to bring back first principles thinking and helping kids dream. How might we enable students and their parents to encourage reinvention of rainbows, flipping it upside down and seeing what happens when you look beyond what's told to you? So instead of focusing on, fast skills, our focus is on integrating the things that will last a lifetime. Things like deep reading, critical thinking, public speaking, writing. These are things that have been the most useful in my own career. I have benefited so much from being able to write, speak, read, critically think effectively at Microsoft, at INSEAD, at Oxford, at Ashoka, at engineering school, across all of these things. I'm not here to make a case that you should read, think, write so that one day you get a job. I think it's time we look beyond the utilitarian aspects of education and really invest in the foundational building blocks of how students learn, why they do what they do, and how can we flip it upside down? How can we change the scenario? One of my favorite quotes of Miles Davis is that to invent the rules or to break the rules, you need to know them. So we're not here to encourage kids to break the rules, but we are definitely here so that students can question the rules, so that students do not draw the standardized drawing every time things come up. So how do you do that? How do you enable people to understand what it takes to become a better, a functioning human being and a better thinker, and by extension, a better and more successful professional? How do you create this long-term thinking mindset? So in the network capital vocabulary, that means starting first with critical thinking as a life skill. So in the Network Capital Summer School, you will learn what critical thinking actually entails and how can students learn concepts like compounding. How can students understand emotional awareness, emotional intelligence, and put it into practice? So in our critical thinking component, which is how the summer school starts, we want to make sure that we enable students to ask the right questions. Yesterday, I was on Swiss national TV for some AI conference. And the points that I made in that AI conference is anything.ai does not make you smarter beyond 5 minutes unless you know how to ask the right questions. Unfortunately, a lot of EdTech has become basically a test preparation center or a FOMO enabled thing. If you don't learn this right now, you will not become the next Satya Nadella or Sundar Pichai. But again, in my first article in the Harvard Business Review, I think I make a compelling case of how FOMO-based education is completely not sustainable. We need to enable students to build their category of one. When you build your category of one, you're not competing with Tom, Dick, Harry, or anybody else. You are competing with yourself. And I think it's the duty of the school and the duty of the parents to encourage every single child, every single student on the planet to build his or her category of one. One of the most important lessons that I've learned in my life is that for as long as you're competing, you are losing because the game is not designed for you to win. Schools teach us, rather, fill our minds into believing that life is a finite game. But at this point, one of the mental models that we'll discuss extensively in the school is the difference between a finite game and an infinite game. A finite game is like cricket or football with defined rules, defined timelines, with very specific set of outcomes which are time bound. Life is an infinite game. For the past year and a half, many of us are Indians. We are going through the horrors of the pandemic nonstop. Everything has changed, and that is life. In a finite game, your goal is to beat the opposition. In an infinite game, which is the game of life, think of marriage, think of meetings, think of shared outcomes, think of anything that matters. Life is an infinite game. And I think students deserve to know that. The goal of an infinite game is not to beat anybody, but arrive at a shared outcome and get to infinite games that takes your community along with you. Your goal is not to win today. Your goal is to survive till the next day. And because we're talking about mental health and emotional awareness also extensively in this particular summer school, a part of our critical thinking is understanding our emotions. I don't think just mentioning the word or saying mental health 100 times a day makes you mentally more healthy. You need to essentially understand when to ask for help, who to go to, and how do you identify or distinguish between a bad day and a rough patch versus a deep issue that needs urgent attention. Now, we are not psychologists or psychiatrists, but we do believe that there are foundational skills that need to be inculcated at the critical thinking level so that students get to understand it. In my book, the first book, The Seductive Illusion of Hard Work, there's a section based entirely on mental models. And I quote extensively Charlie Munger, who's a business partner of Warren Buffett. And he says that if you look at life as a lattice work of mental models to think of making business decisions, emotional decisions, and all kinds of decisions, life is a better life. So we're going to use some of those mental models and through case studies, ensure that the students are well equipped to learn what they need to make sounder and smarter decisions, and most importantly, ask the right questions. Many of you are already successful parents doing really well for yourself. Ask yourself, did some rote learning in school or college or business school help you today? Or the fact that your ability to reinvent yourself, ask the question, is why you are perhaps where you are? I venture a guess, most of you are like accomplished, ambitious parents. You want the best for your students. But if you look at your own life, I'm so sure that you will find hundreds of mistakes that you wish you never did. And the way to think about those mistakes is through a very simple mental model called pain plus reflection equal to progress. This comes from a hedge fund manager, Ray Dalio. But simply knowing pain plus reflection equal to progress is not enough. You actually don't need the Network Capital Summer School for you to know that. You can read Ray Dalio's book. But to really apply pain plus reflection equal to progress as a life principle, when taking business decisions, when taking decisions about academics, about what to study, what to ignore, whether it comes to emotional decisions, perhaps your child or you had a breakup. Perhaps you had a breakdown. How do you reflect on that? How do you make that a daily practice? How do you know the various kinds of philosophical writings that have come up on this subject to actually employ it? These things do not work on a life deferment principle. Let me first get into Oxford or Harvard or INSEAD or Stanford, and then I will think about taking care of life or my mental health, etc., etc. This process of looking at work-life harmony, not balance, is a critical thing that needs to be engaged or included from the very beginning, from the time you start having conversations with children. So that's the first component. The second component of the summer school is going to be deep writing and deep reading. Essentially, writing is a life skill. Now, whether you decide to become an engineer, a product manager, a NASA scientist, or an athlete, you will have to learn to communicate complex ideas through the power of words. I don't know a single successful person who has an interesting life who does not spend a decent amount of time writing. But if you look at the curriculum in most schools around the world, not just in India, writing seems to be an afterthought. It's far more focused on the harder skill. And I'm not saying that the harder skills don't matter, but I think if you have to look at foundational elements that build your knowledge, writing and speaking are critical things in that entire endeavor. So the people who are going to teach writing in this summer school, you can just browse through the networkcapital.tv masterclasses and podcasts. Our writing faculty or people who've done previous masterclasses include Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Dr. Anamika, who's my mother, Sahitya Academy Award winning author. You have a whole range of authors like Kimberly Stark, Crystal, and so many more who've gone on from being New York Times #1 bestsellers to conquering the same on Amazon and so forth. So we got to make sure that every single child who participates in the summer school has whatever it takes to become a great writer one day. Nobody is born a great writer. You become better through diligent and deliberate practice. How do I know that? Through a mental model. What is that mental model? Power of compounding. So unless and until, I mean, again, I'm going back to the previous point, you make mental models a part of your personal operating system, you're not going to be able to fulfill your potential. Life is an infinite game, and I think students deserve to know that. The third component is speaking. I think this particular discussion with hundreds of you would not be possible if Varya, me, Karthik, Garima, Baba, etc. Were not comfortable addressing large people. I would have much rather done it in person, because as a public speaker, you enjoy that, you draw energy from it. But doing it digitally enables us to make the Network Capital Summer School and eventually the Network Capital chain of schools the truly most international blend of students you can bring together. Karthik and I both studied abroad. Karthik, interestingly, also went to an international school in Switzerland, in India for some bit, and then in New York. And this entire experience of learning with and from each other, learning with people who actually disagree with you on many things, but still being their fast friend, is something that carries a lot of weight and is so important in this world where we have global problems, but we have, unfortunately, very local solutions that don't seem to work. If you look at the pandemic is an excellent example of a global problem completely botched up by hyper-nationalistic approaches by several countries. There is no, you can't solve the pandemic with, with an Bangladeshi approach or a Pakistani approach or an American approach. You need to really come together. And it comes back to the essential point of the power of radical collaboration. This entire construct of looking at these three pillars, critical thinking, writing, speaking, is something that I really wished I had in school. I've always been a pretty good student, but the truth is, parents and students, I have been a really confused high school student. I was a very confused high school student. So why am I telling you this? That even if you do well, you can still be hyper confused. One of the fellowships that Network Capital has is called I Don't Know What I Want to Do with My Life Fellowship. But if you look at the origin of how Varya and I came up with this particular fellowship, it stemmed from my personal confusion. And what was the personal confusion? My personal confusion was that I was very good at math and science, but I really wanted to do acting and take up perhaps join Bollywood or do theater all my life, perhaps join cricket. My heart was there. I was good at something else. And what does strength-based leadership tell you? If you follow your strengths, it'll take you in the right direction. It's only partially true. But having spent a good chunk of my high school years, which were very good, a very rewarding and charming time, but also being confused, was not an easy experience. The reason I wanted to include mental health and emotional well-being in this particular program is not only because it's actually something really scary and we should all be worried about that. The achievement that I'm most proud of in my life is that I have very beautiful, meaningful relationship with my parents, my family, my friends, and my community. That is my single biggest achievement. Network Capital wouldn't exist without that. And even with somebody with excellent, deep relationship with large number of people, there have been innumerable times in my life where I just refused to come forward and ask for help. Now, why was that? I think it was there because perhaps there was a taboo. Perhaps I didn't have the vocabulary to ask for help at that time. Perhaps I didn't know how do you contextualize that help into something practical. How do you look at pain plus reflection equal to progress at different arenas or different junctures of your life? So through my personal understanding of the subject, I started reading a lot more about emotional wellness, emotional well-being. I wrote extensively about it in World Economic Forum, Mint, eventually my book. And after reading all the available insights, I've come to the conclusion, drawing upon the works of Emily Shafani and many other people that I admire, that mental health in schools or mental health in early college actually is something that is bound to happen. It's going to come up more and more in the years to come because there is social media, there is expectation from peers. I remember as a good student in India, it's almost preordained that you will study engineering or medicine. Now, how do you tell people who have great expectations from you that actually your heart doesn't lie there? In my case, actually, I enjoyed technology, but I know so many people who went to the best engineering colleges in India, but couldn't care less about it. They just did it because why? What else would I do? I can't disappoint. So the expectation of parents is one. The way social media hurls information at us, it basically makes us really jealous creatures. If you study social media carefully, different apps, they are essentially modeled on the 7 deadly sins of Roman Catholicism. Instagram is the envy app. How is my perfectly curated life look better looking than your perfectly curated but false life? So it's like this very interesting charade that's going on, but we don't have the language to process it. So look at the 7 deadly sins and you will be able to map every single social media app. So are we saying that children should abandon social media apps? Absolutely not. Why? Because careers are changing in the 21st century. Again, for good or for bad, more people, more children aspire to be YouTubers in future than NASA scientists. Now, I'm not here to pass a judgment on whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but let the students decide. I don't think it's fair for parents or counselors or somebody else to come from the outside and say, no, we know you, you must study this. That is basically using force or saying that I know you better than you know yourself. That may be true, but then you failed to actually enable the students to and your children to make the decisions that they should have. Your job, I think, as parents, is to give them the vocabulary, give them the mental models, give them the questions so that they can make up their own minds. If you do that, I think you've done a great job. Just like wrapping this segment up, I would say that as you look at the vocabulary of mental health, vocabulary of, what do you want your students to be? Think of what do you want your children to become in future, and don't think in terms of professions. I want them to be a Microsoft executive or a investor at it. Those are very micro. Think about what are the values that you really want to instill. What would you love to see in your student, and then work backwards. When you match values, strengths, market demands, and different business models, you come to a very interesting sweet spot where you will find a resonance between what the child truly cares about, what the world needs, and what the child can be paid for. So our mission is this sweet spot. In Japan, they call it ikigai. the fusion of who you are, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. Our mission is to inspire Ikigai among every single student in our summer school. And our summer school is just the first part of our adventure. This is a pandemic in a way, the way education is being handled. And we're going to take these schools in the cloud, the norm. I know that many of you have incredible questions and ideas and insights for your children, but it'll be wonderful if we can have your children train with us, learn within from us, from the best of professionals around the world, so that they can make sense of this very chaotic, very adventurous, very confusing life that we're all part of. In the summer school, we're only going to accept 50 students. So we are about 30 in now. So there were 20 spots left. So if you're interested, please feel free to go to networkcapital.tv. In the fellowship segment, you'll see summer school and sign up. We've decided to cap it at 50 because we want to make learning experience something really precise and personalized. There is time for Q&A in this particular conversation, but I want to quickly turn it over to my friend Karthik, who will tell you about the mental health curriculum and what does mental health mean to him. In the past, Karthik has taught impact investing in a wide range of fellowships on Network Capital. And Karthik and I have been friends for a while. And every single person that I bring to the school is somebody who I personally trust blindly with their intellect and their heart. That is how much I care for making sure that the learning experience is just right. So on the Network Capital masterclasses itself, we invite people who are exceptional achievers, but in the school, we are inviting people who we know will deliver a fantastic fantastic learning experience. So over to you, Karthik. Tell us a bit about yourself and what mental health means to you.
Thank you so much, Utkarsh, and wonderful to be here with all of you this evening. As Utkarsh said, I'm someone, we've known each other for more than a decade now, and we're friends and we're colleagues. My day job is in a field known as impact investment, which many of you may or may not be familiar with. But basically, it's venture capital, but for the social sector. And I also look at inner engineering as well as outer, you could say. And several friends, including Utkarsh, myself, and others, have basically set up this collaborative called the Happiness Collective. Just given the situation our country and the world is going through, the overall importance of mental health and emotional wellness, I think, can't be overstated, especially in a country like India, where people have said that something like 70% of people suffer from some sort of issue, and particularly in today's environment, right? Which I don't think needs to be repeated, but the sense of helplessness, anger, frustration, and particularly amongst young students. So the background is that we have done a lot of work with millennials on career intelligence, and that frankly is the most important aspect of mental wellness. If you ask millennials, right, and we've done these surveys, what are the top 3 areas? One is careers and money, financial issues. Second is health, body issues, and sexuality. And third is relationships, right? Which again bifurcates. Usually it's friends that are for them the most important relationship, partners and parents. And invariably 70% of them indicate careers and financial pressure. And of course, this links to studies as the most important issue affecting mental wellness. So the Happiness Collaborative is a community. We'll share the link. You're welcome to join us. The idea is that there's a range of programming on offer there. It's essentially a gateway for any young person in India to engage in mental health, right? So there's this range of programming available. There's social media content, and we're working with mental health experts and so on and so forth. But specifically coming to this issue with Karsh, and to address it bang on, right? Then what does mental health mean for young people? There was some research that was done on the different thought process of millennials versus Gen X versus what are called boomers. And here we're talking about people even younger than millennials on 3 attributes, right? Which is, what do they value? How do they believe they should be compensated? And what really motivates them? And the differences are stark. So firstly, in terms of what they value, millennials said they value individuality. Gen X, time. Time is the most important thing for them, for people like my generation. And for boomers, it's success. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. In terms of on what basis should someone get paid, right? Boomers have tended to believe that it's experience, that the more experience you have, the more you should be compensated. Gen X have tended to believe that it's on contribution, or sorry, on merit, that based on, how good you are. And millennials have usually said it's based just on contribution or the effort that you put in, not necessarily the output that it generates, right? So there are fundamental differences here. And finally, in terms of what they value, boomers understandably have generally tended to focus on political issues the most, freedom-related issues. The Gen X generation, economic issues, right? And this generation, the millennial generation, much more on social issues. So there are fundamental differences here. And we, through the Happiness Collective and through our partners, what we're proposing to offer here, and we're going to work with Network Capital very closely on, is 2 or 3 modules specifically focused on working with these kids on mental models. What are the mental models for aspirational and high-performing young people? Many of the things that Utkarsh spoke about, right? How do you make effective decisions? Risk-taking, right? How do you think innovatively? Values-based leadership, empathy, and other aspects. What we call social commercial balance, this trade-off between wanting to make money versus wanting to do good for society, and how, or wanting to create some other impact. What does impact mean to you? Interdisciplinary thinking. At Asha Impact, I'm very proud of the fact, not of all the funds that we've raised or all the startups that we've funded or the exits, but the team that we have built over the last decade or so. Young people, 20, 21 years old, who have come and worked for us, done great work, and are now doing wonderful things later on in their careers. So the same thought process, extending it to a younger audience, self-awareness, self-discipline, self-improvement, cross-cultural awareness, as Utkarsh mentioned, and essentially managing ambiguity. So these are all the mental models. We can also look at, and we will, specific case studies. So using, examples of like someone like myself or other people. And finally, to customize this to the extent possible through some exercises and some surveys that we'll do with the students to really figure out what's important to them. So this is what we're looking forward to doing. Very, very excited to do this. I just want to let my colleague Garima, who's actually the community manager for the THC, also just say a few words about why we're doing this. But overall, we're very, very excited and looking forward to working with you guys on this.